am a little bit curious if anybody had some stories going on in their head while they were meditating today. Anybody? Show of hands? Yeah. So I am really interested in stories, and I thought I'll tell one story, just because stories can be. I had such a good description for today. I didn't memorize it, but that that stories can transmit lots of wisdom. They can be entertaining. They can be about fantasy, reality. We can have pictures that tell us stories. I mean, this room that we're in is I know folks are back at home on Zoom, but there's all kinds of paintings. They tell stories, and this is a story that's partly an aspiration for why I started to facilitate and teach. I teach mindfulness-based stress reduction. I teach another program called Unwinding Anxiety, Mindful Eating, and I guide different groups. I teach at University of Southern California. I teach at University of California, Irvine. That particular is a climate resilience group, and it's really founded on meditation and then people taking action. So, but how I find myself being so interested is I want to help people to reduce suffering in the world and in their lives, and as much as possible, really. It's a kind of a nice aspiration. And I've only told this story once, and it happened to be it's not my story, at a retreat at Yokoji. So if anybody's been there, you might have heard this as a story. It's called a Jataka tale, and then in India, there was a time where Buddhism was actually a really popular religion. Right now, it's not. It's Hinduism, and they had a lot of stories, and I want to be respectful in every way possible. I can only say from my own understanding that it's a little bit like a Aesop's fable, and maybe not everybody knows what that is, but these fables from ancient Greece, I think. So they had these, but the intention of the stories were about the Buddha, and then many traditions, people believe the Buddha had many past lives. Not everybody believes that, many do. They did back in ancient India. And so these were stories about the previous lives of the Buddha before he became the Buddha. Like he was reincarnated over and over again. So there's a bit of supernatural in this, and just so you know, and as opposed to natural being that it doesn't include gods, and there's nothing, not to say that one isn't true, I just want to say that. This idea of supernatural, we have gods and events that occur that are extraordinary. And so these were many, many stories that sometimes the Buddha had the life of an animal, sometimes it was a person, and the intention was to illustrate lessons of virtue and compassion, wisdom, and to teach people about like selflessness. And so this is called it's called The Brave Little Parrot. That helps if I remember the name. The Brave Little Parrot. And so there's a parrot with a bunch of his friends in the forest, and he happened to be, everyone else was like a four-legged creature. He was the only one that could fly, but he was hanging out. And then suddenly there was a fire. And so the parrot flew up to see what was going on and came down and told them, because it could fly, and said, "Oh my gosh, we have to run to the river. The forest is on fire." And his friends were running, but the forest was now blazing, and so there was a lot of panic, and the only thing the parrot could think of is that he's going to put out the fire. This tiny little parrot goes diving into the river, and then goes to the fire and sprinkles these little drops of water that's doing, pretty much nothing. But all I could think of is, he wants to save his friends, And so this is ancient India, where there are these Brahmin gods who are looking down from above, kind of almost, some of them were laughing, oh, what is that little parrot doing? And he's swooping down and sprinkling a little bit more. And one of them, was just so impressed that it turns itself into an eagle, as the legend goes, and flies right next to the little parrot and basically says, like, what are you doing? There's no way you're going to put out this fire. But at the same time, they're so impressed that they themselves start crying, and somehow this puts out the fire. And it's starting to put out the fire. But he looks at the little parrot, and he says, like, what do you think you're doing? Like, why are you doing this? You're not going to put out the fire. And he turns and looks to him and says, if not me, then who? And so, kind of this impossible task, like, if not me, then who? And I just find that to be an inspiration, like, if not me, then who? And it kind of just told you about this resiliency course, where we have all these students, many of them started with hopelessness. Like, why are they taking the class? It was really upsetting. Some people said they never want to have children because of the state of what they're seeing and hearing about the environment. And so the course was to help develop mindful awareness as a resilience practice, so that they could face the uncomfortable, and then they also had an assignment to do something to take action. And so students did like cleanups, or they did recycling projects, they did some kind of activism, like with the university itself, like seeing that they had paper products that weren't from recycled sources, these kind of things. And then by the end, there was this huge transition, a change of relationship, where people, because they now took action, that they made a contribution, and saw that, just they could maybe start to make a little bit of change. And so I thought I would tell you those two stories. It's kind of three stories wrapped in there, because it's my inspiration. A little bit about me also is that I worked as a computer animation artist at Disney and DreamWorks Animation, and another place called Rhythm and Hues, which you probably have never heard of. But at Rhythm and Hues, we were hired as the animation studio for the big studios. So we made Babe and Babe Pig in the City, and a whole bunch of other Narnia, and a whole bunch of Life of Pi, all these really beautiful films, but you don't see like, oh, that was Rhythm and Hues. And then we made a ton of commercials back in the earlier days, that before filmmaking started using, including the Coca-Cola polar bears back in the 90s, and really cool stuff. But storytelling, the reason why I'm telling you is storytelling has been a big part of my life, and how would an animator become someone who teaches mindfulness and dharma related things? The interesting thing for me is that it's so much about understanding, like in filmmaking, that many of the movies that we watch are very much about flashbacks to the past, and stories where they flash to the future, or lots of stories about pulling the emotions. Like, it's an art form that the intention, a good movie will lead the audience to laugh and to cry, and that's an incredible art form, to be able to push and pull what's going on in here. And so this is something I realized, like, oh yeah, that's sort of really connected to what a lot of meditative practice is about, is to understand like this nonverbal language, and to be alive through these kind of instinctive and sensorial qualities and capacities that we have, and to see how they can actually bring us happiness or also cause us suffering, and where we can get in our own way. Now, everybody practices for different reasons. There's so many different traditions. I'm just sharing my own experience. And that's kind of how I got into it. And there's so many ways, as I mentioned, to tell stories, like comedy, drama. I have here suspense, love, aversion, family life, work, personal, survival, news, social media. I mean, how much does news and social media drive anybody's life here? Or, and because we have so much exposure, there's a lot of stimulation too. And so getting back to some of the benefits of meditation, it can be a way to just pause, like coming into a room like this where we have our smart devices down, although, hello everybody on Zoom, and there's a little electronics here, which is a great technology to connect. But to pause and to even just see, to settle our minds, and also it's an opportunity to see what arises. And if you have a daily practice, it may be a place to see patterns of thinking, lots of past thinking or future planning. Anybody have that? So, and also to see, like as I mentioned, I did start kind of a detailed beginning about Upādāna, and I like the word, it just sounds fun. But fueling, what is fueling some of our discontent, or what's a bummer? I mean, there are all kinds of things that we can't control that are a bummer, and then we react to them. We could have an automatic reaction, or we could have more of a response. Like we could suffer from it, or we could learn how to have a little bit of resilience. And that's for each one of us to discover. I'm not going to say what they are specifically, but practice can really be a great way of developing resilience, to have compassion for ourselves, like when we see that we're our own cause of getting in our own way. A lot of times it could be thinking, like the way thinking can be the fuel, the Upādāna as a fuel, a storytelling, and then clinging to that. So I just see that image of like a torch as the fuel, the wood as a fuel, and then the flame, and how thoughts can be like that. And so one way to explore thinking or storytelling is to see it, just to be aware of it. It's like, oh yeah, I'm kind of telling myself, I'm aware. Because I could be, I'll just amuse myself, but anybody else get lost in thought and that rumination? Anybody? So this idea, the etymology or the root meaning of, as I have studied, of rumination, it comes from when animals chew on their cud. So this idea of chewing was the original meaning of rumination. And then it evolved to actually including chewing on thought. And rumination typically is a negative mind state, kind of aversive or pessimistic. And so if these are habits, these can be habits and ways of being. During probably any time, any era, there's been influences that could be kind of a downer. And so it could be that any of us can become more prone to having a pessimistic and negative thinking patterns. And some that might become depression, some it might become anxiety, some it could just be everyday melancholy. And then to have the capacity to see it as opposed to just be lost in it. And of course, many people do see therapists, and that's really healthy and actually can work in concert with meditative practice. I just wanted to put that as a side. But I'm talking quite specifically about how through practice we can see, I do have habits of negative thinking. I see it, like I can name it. And then that can even just change relationship with it. It's like, at least I'm seeing it. That's a lot better than being completely lost in it. And so this is part of like ancient teaching too. There's, not to go into the whole original teaching, but I know in the Theravada tradition, one of the most popular teachings is the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And so this is quite a bit about connecting with being present with the body and feeling into the body, sensing what's here, having the understanding there are unpleasant and pleasant sensations that are coming and going, and that there's also thoughts that are coming and going. And so it's this constant monitoring. The mindfulness is this monitoring capacity with heartfulness, like with goodwill, to see, all these things are arising and passing. And which ones are ones that I can have some agency to shift. So it could be, my thinking. Like I just see that I'm really, I have a pattern of, this is hypothetical, I have a pattern of I'm trying to come up with the right word, kind of catastrophic thinking. Yeah, everything's going to go wrong. It's like, but that might not be true at all. It's just sort of an attitude, or it could come from fear. It might be that there's conditioning that some of us have. I know I have quite a bit. We just lived through this pandemic, and there's always something coming, always something. The people who came before us had all kinds of stuff. So just to see it and to name it, and then to explore the possibility, and this is a very lovely and wonderful part of of Buddhist practices is I see it, it's not true, it's my own imagination, I'm telling stories. And can I have some kind of practice that I can move away from that and start to move away from this even as a habitual pattern. Like it is a habitual pattern to have this constant negative thinking that's bringing me discontent. So maybe a good example I like to share. I was just in Florida when a hurricane arrived, and on my flight home, it was postponed, and I missed my connection and so forth. But there's a lot of turbulence. So to be on an airplane when there's turbulence, just like you prepare, you buy your ticket, you do everything, and then you're on a plane, and there's a lot of turbulence, and that could be really scary. And your head, my head could just be telling all kinds of stories. It's like, oh, well, yeah, there's a lot. I've been on so many airplanes that have turbulence, and luckily they've all come out okay. But just to be with it, it's like kind of be with the shaking, kind of like a roller coaster, and just pause, like to be with the direct experience of the body, and for a moment see, oh yeah, there's all that thinking, but just to be with it and breathe with it to the point where the thinking stops, and there's this freedom. Like I've changed relationship with my own self, that I've diminished this kind of negative thinking that just adds on to the worry and the fear and the pain of like the turbulence. And this is just more of a metaphor. This is a true story, but it's a metaphor for everyday life, that we could do everything to have everything go smoothly, but there's still going to be these turbulence. And then is it possible that when the turbulence arises, that there's a lot of spinning and storytelling that make it worse, that make more pain, and that we might have this capacity to pause, even just by stopping and say, oh, there's thinking. I'm feeding it. That's that Upādāna. I'm feeding that, I'm fueling it, and I'm clinging to it. And is it possible that if I just pause and stop, and like, is this true? Sometimes it could just be something that feels dangerous or fearful. Is that something that one of my teachers, Judd Brewer, taught me? So I give him full credit. Is that dangerous, or is it just different? I'm just feeling something that's different. It's kind of like a ghost, it's like spooking me. And then to face it, oh yeah, this is just different. And practices that could be done, short practices many times, just like, oh, this is a moment for a little loving kindness. For those here who know what loving kindness is, we'll do a little practice for the new folks. But just bringing compassion, like, oh yeah, may I care for myself joyfully. May I be peaceful. May I be happy. May I be safe. And there's a sweetness, because this is something that comes from the inside. It's like an inner wellspring, an intrinsic capacity for self-care. We don't have to reach for our cell phone. Sometimes it is really valuable to reach for a friend or a loved one, but that we could, instead of reaching for like some substance or stress eating, these other things that could just mount more discontent, the wanting to reach for something to feel better that's material, or in Buddhist teaching we'll call them worldly. So this kind of unworldly or intrinsic capacity to find self-care, and then of course care for others. Like absolutely, that we can be calmer and more stable and steady, just like we're in a posture for meditation, a posture that's stable and steady, and to observe when the mind is fluctuating and unconcentrated and making up all kinds of stuff. I was going to say shit. There I go. But so the storytelling. This is something that happens to many of us, and I thought of some other stories. A big part of this is clear seeing, and that takes practice to say like, oh yeah, I am really making a mountain out of a molehill. And I have a habit of doing that. And gee, wouldn't that be nice if I could get out of the habit? I still do that. So, but to see it is the beginning. So that's the first step. It's like, oh, I see I have this habit. And then another step is to contemplate, to reflect, to see, oh, is this something that's harming me or others? Like, to even just take 5 minutes to do it, like a pause. And then if the better alternative is to distract away from this kind of thinking, it could be to do a loving kindness practice or self-compassion practice, to take a walk, take a shower, do something to move away. But But all that, the first step is to see it, like as opposed to just sit there and be miserable and add to it, and then maybe add some pain to other people's lives. So these 3 steps of awareness, to wake up to it, to reflect, and to even see like what's the downside. This is in so many teachings from Buddhism, is to see, is this harmful or helpful? You know, is this wholesome or unwholesome? Is this beneficial or unbeneficial? Like, what's the downside? And there's quite a bit of teaching about disenchantment. And so this kind of second step to really see, oh yeah, this is causing me pain, this is causing pain of others, is a way to connect with our personal ethics. Maybe it just is simply non-harm and self-care. If that's the only ethic that you have or I have, that could be the inspiration to change behavior. And then this third step is to change the behavior. And to practice over and over again can be a way to rehearse. It's like rehearsal. That's why I think they call it practice. We've been trained and conditioned to maybe make a mountain out of a molehill, so we can train and decondition ourselves to disenchant these kind of habits and become free in many ways from many different behaviors. Hopefully to have more happiness and freedom, and then it's going to rub off on other people. That's for sure. So there's this one story that I really like, and I remember it from when I was a kid. My mom gave me the book about the little train that could. I don't know anybody know the little train that could. So having this recognizing it's like, I can't do that, or no one will want me to do that, or this kind of negative mindset. And negativity, this is something a lot of people on the scientific side of mindfulness, people do research, they talk about the negativity bias. And so the story of the little train that could seems like a good one. It's really practical. Maybe most of us have heard of it. That it's like, oh, I can't. There's all these reasons why I can't, I won't. I hear it on the Olympics, all these people saying, yeah, or even the Academy Awards is, keep dreaming and keep trying, and if you don't even start there, you're not even gonna have a chance. So this idea, like, I think I can. That little train made it to the top of the hill, and after he started going to the other side, he said, like, I thought I could. And the last time I was here, I think it was a couple months ago, I talked about, I won't tell that whole story again, but there's a teaching, they call it the 5 faculties. And one is just to have from evidence, that we can build evidence. The first step is an evidence and a faith based on experience. Like, yeah, I did it that time, I can do it again. And to have perseverance. And that mindfulness can be this moderating capacity to see, this kinds of fueling of maybe negative thinking that's causing a lot of suffering. So this is the moderator to see that, oh yeah, so I'm going to see that when I've tried this before, I have confidence this is going to work, I'm going to persevere, I'll bring some concentration, and I'm going to bring some discernment. So there are these 5 capacities that we all have in us: confidence, energy, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom, or discernment. So that there are these different qualities that we all have that we can bring forth, that we can also teach ourselves and train ourselves. And knowing that it even says in the, as I mentioned, the 4 foundations of mindfulness, in the very beginning, which I brought a copy here, just for fun, that it's attributed to the historic Buddha. And in the second paragraph, it says, he is talking to all people, that one trains oneself, that this is a training. And it's a training, one trains himself. As I breathe in, I'm calming the body. And one trains oneself, I breathe out, calming the body, fabrication. Those are the first 2 paragraphs. So it is clearly a training. And that we can be trained to have conditioning to think, oh, I make a mountain out of a molehill. And we can train ourselves to reverse that. So we can go from having a negative bias to a positive bias, to have perhaps moments where we have ill will at the people who try to run us off the road, to having goodwill. It's like, oh yeah, I'm going to let you in. That we can train, and which one feels better? What's the better alternative? So this noting practice that we did could be done in everyday life too. Like, so it could be, oh, I note, oh yeah, there's thinking. It can be done while we're driving. It's like, oh yeah, I'm driving. It's like I'm really tense. It's like, oh yeah, there's tension, and then kind of changing relationship with this tension. So this idea of noting and observing, this mindful observing, whether it's the thoughts or the sensations, to see how we can have a more easeful, breathing easier way of being, and how that's going to help others along the way. So I just wanted to share that today, a little bit about storytelling, and if there's any questions or comments or debates, I'm happy to. Yes?
Oh, Sherry was asking about the 5 things, confidence, wisdom, if you could repeat that for her.
Oh, right. So sometimes they're described differently, but they're called the 5 faculties. Sometimes they're called the 5 spiritual factory. So it's confidence, sometimes called faith, energy, or perseverance, and the third is mindfulness, and the 4th is concentration, that we can become, really concentrate, and then the 5th is discernment or wisdom. But if you want to look up, it's called the 5 spiritual faculties. And someone who masters them, it's one of the only lists in the Buddhist teaching in the Theravada tradition where it's listed twice with 2 different names. One is the spiritual faculties, and then when somebody masters them, you have to master it, it's called the spiritual powers, because they're considered superpowers. If you have confidence, if you have perseverance, if you have that mindful awareness, if you have that concentration, and you have that wisdom and discernment, those are superpowers to guide us through our life. So, yeah, thanks for that question.